Welcome to The Atlantic at Sundance. I'm David Sims. I'm a staff writer with The Atlantic, and I'm delighted today to moderate today's discussion about the film 892. This film is based on the real life of military and war veteran Brian Brown-Easley, and it explores the mental and emotional health of veterans returning to civilian life. Please welcome director and screenwriter Abi Damaris Corbin and screenwriter Kwame Kwei-Armah. Thank you guys for being here today. Let's jump right in.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Thanks, guys, and thank you for the movie. It is it's exceptionally well done, I think, and it's a huge storytelling challenge that you guys are taking on with this character and with this sort of incident, and I want to know what how you guys came to this story and how you first sort of heard about Brian Brown-Easley.
Well, I can start there. I was driving actually and saw the article about Brian Brown-Easley written so powerfully by Aaron Gell, and pulled over, read it all 30-some pages of it, and my heart was broken. This story had to be told, and I saw reflected a lot of my father's own struggles as a veteran, and knew to tell this story honestly. I wanted to make sure that we told the nuance, the truth of it, and then reached out to Kwame, my beautiful collaborator.
I mean, Abby likes to frame it that way, but I auditioned for her over a vegan Thai meal at a lovely restaurant. And actually, I'd only just read the article. On my way over to see her, I had seen Abby's movie, but I read the article, and then I met her, and I said, I just need to be part of telling this story. Please, can I join the party? And party may sound like the wrong word to use, but it was like a fest, because we knew that there was a truth that Brian's story amplified and articulated about the state of our country and the state of the world, the state of human beings who feel valued less than $892. And so starting that journey with Abby, it was kind of, I just wanted to be part of it, and I wanted to be part of making sure that somehow we tried to find the truth of Brian's articulation, which is help, look, see, and change.
Yeah, so Abby, you said your father is a veteran who struggled sort of with the bureaucracy of the VA as well as, so you had that acquaintance with it. That's what sort of first hooked you about Brian's story.
Yeah, it was an intimate reflection for me to see Brian's story. I knew so much of the rage, the desperation that Brian went through because I lived it with my dad, and it's something that a lot of other veterans live with, and one of the drivers behind us telling the story. We don't want it to be told again in 20 years and 30 years.
I feel like also it's the Task and Purpose article, which, as you say, it's very, very long. It's very in depth and intensely researched and all that. But this is still not a widely known story. There, I feel like there's still not a lot of wider reporting about what happened here. And so you're working with this incident that is sort of sensational, but it's also it's a little hidden. Like, I feel like a lot of the deeper truths of it are not really well known.
Which is quite bizarre, because
right.
At least to me, because this was a heist, for want of a better term, that was very 21st century, or very third decade of the 21st century. Brian went in and he said, I have a bomb on me, and I'm going to blow everything up unless I get the $892 that is owed to me. And then while inside says, but I'm not going to rely on you telling my story. I'm now going to reach out to the local news network and almost Insta live, almost TikToky. I'm going to bring you inside of the thing that I'm living right now. And so one would have thought that this story would have been really, really well known. And when I discovered that it wasn't, it doubled down on my determination to work with Abi to make sure that we captured the truth of someone who in their desperation still had the presence of mind to say, look at me, let my situation, let my pain be a catalyst for change.
Right. It's obviously there's a sort of history of films that tell these kinds of stories of a sort of a hostage situation or a bank stick up, something like that. But usually the character is not coming in with such a specific strategy. That is something that's very unusual here. That there's a strategy that barely involves the bank at all. Really, it's really just more of a cry for attention and help and more to shed light on something. And it's sort of interesting that didn't totally work. I was sort of fascinated watching the film. Afterwards, I start Googling. I'm like, why have I never heard more about this, really?
I think Brian had watched a lot of those movies too.
Right.
He was a little surprised it didn't go the way that he expected.
So how did you guys connect? Did you know each other beforehand in any way, or how does this sort of collaboration come about, apart from the sort of shared interest, obviously, in the tale?
I'm a straight up fangirl of Kwame Kwei-Armah's work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really sweet of her to say that. And I owe you at least $100 for that, to say that on a publication that I really respect. Thank you, Abi. I mean, I came to our lunch or dinner actually in fanboy position, but we share a mutual manager, and the brilliant Max called me and he said, I think you want to meet Abi. You want to meet this woman. She's pretty amazing. And as I said, then I watched her film and I was like, oh, yes. And I'd come across her movie before at BAFTA, which I think was a winner there, certainly nominated. And so I came to meet her because I was a fan. And then we kind of tooled up, I think, found great commonality in our care about this story, in our care about the dignity of a human life, and sometimes the desperate things we do to be heard.
So as you're starting to sketch out how the film is going to, did you quickly settle on setting it basically within the hours of the hostage situation itself, with only a little bit outside of that? Like, how did you sketch out the screenplay's sort of narrative skeleton?
For us, Brian's time in the bank was a snapshot of a lot of the struggle that he had gone through. So in many senses, a story tells you what it wants to be. So we listened, we researched, we connected with Brian's family, we walked the paths to the bank, and as is the process for every project, you chisel away and then it becomes sharper each pass.
I think also, Abi, that pretty early on in our process, we went, all right, so this is probably a movie of two parts. Act one should feel like a chamber piece in the bank, and almost theatrical in its exchanges and its subtext. And then Act two, or part two, explodes that to the outside world. And so we kind of landed on that pretty soon, didn't we, Abi? And then we just kind of chiseled away. We did that at first, excuse me. And then we kind of went, okay, we've done that. Now let's go down another path. And then we kind of merged both paths. But then I think we landed back at that place where we went, all right, it's chamber and it's outer world. And then we kind of just kept digging in down that avenue.
There's also something very much embedded in Brian's story that's a Greek tragedy. And a lot of the footprint, whether consciously or unconsciously, we followed was that of a Greek tragedy, was the footsteps of, okay, you have three people, it takes place over, 24 hours, and you're on that person's team, they go past a point where there is no return. And Brian's story very much followed in the paths set in ancient history that were there for us.
Because, I mean, I suppose, is there a moment, obviously, sort of by the end of the film, he seems more resigned, he's more fatalistic, he seems to think that it's not his day is going to end, his life is going to end on this day. But do you think he's entering the bank in that mindset? Like, is that part of the sort of Greek tragedy that you're sketching out, or is there a sort of a turn where that becomes more real to him?
Abby, what do you think?
You start.
I think this is what it was like all of the time when we were working together. That's how beautiful it was. I feel, and it doesn't mean that I'm right, I feel that he walks into the bank as a black man and says, I'm going to hold this up and I have a bomb. And I might not even call it fatalistic, though it is, but realistic, to feel that your chances of coming out alive are quite slim. And so do I think that hope always resides somewhere in our hearts? Yes. Do I think that in the nether regions of his mind, he felt, if I go in and I tell my story, I might get my money back and this might be all right? Yes. But I think he always knew he was going to jail. I think he thought he also was going to die. But this was worth it for the dignity and the message that he would send to his daughter and to the world.
So you said you spoke. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Abby.
Kwame said it beautifully. I, of course, agree and echo all of that. Would only add that he walked in that place into the bank from a place of love, a love for country, a love for his daughter, and that nether region of hope comes from that place of love.
Amen.
And so you said you spoke to members of his family. Did you, in doing the research, did you speak to anyone else from, any survivors of the event, people who worked at the bank or anything like that? Or how did you approach that research?
We did. We do want to respect their privacy, so we'll withhold their names for now. But we did do our best to be honest and truthful to the story that took place that day, while knowing that the folks that went through this on July 7th are not the only ones who struggled. So we wanted to tap into the universal truth of what happened that day.
Okay, so so in terms of casting, what was your approach there? Obviously, it's a wonderful cast. Obviously, John is giving this incredible performance, but the whole ensemble is very, very well realized. And so, how did you think about sort of fleshing out every sort of member of the ensemble?
Can I just jump in and just to say, no, that's a real tribute, and I know it's obvious, but that's a real tribute to Abby. Abby looks after every bit of her movies with all of her heart, and she went into casting that way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Kwame. I do put. I find the pieces of the film. Your film's a huge piece, a puzzle piece, right? As a director, your job is to make sure that the puzzle's complete, that everyone's looking at the same picture on the box, right? And I met with folks, and when they saw the same picture on the box, you say, please jump in and fill out that piece, because it's only gonna be you. And John, as you all saw, he's magnetic. He's a generational talent. He's got the artistry, the heart that brings Brian alive in a way that is just so truthful. And that's what I would say of each of the actors, that they brought truth. And when you sit down with someone who's willing to give you that, to go the extra steps that it takes to bring to a performance to that place, you know that they're the right person to speak life into those words on the page.
The only thing that I would augment that with is that when we got to the end of the first draft, I said to Abby, it's got to be John, hasn't it? And Abby went, yes, please. And I sent him and his manager an email immediately and just said, listen, please look at this, please. And unfortunately, John wasn't available at that point. But we're believers in who's meant to be in the room will be in the room. And eventually, by the time we got to actually shooting this, he was available, and that feels to me like that was above our calling. It felt like it came from somewhere else.
How did you? That's very serendipitous, because it's sort of hard to imagine anyone else in the role. How did you? How did you approach? It's so difficult, obviously, playing a real life person, a person, right, who has family members and so on who are out there and all that. Like how was his approach to the character? Was it different than yours in any way, or was there a sort of total collaboration there?
It was better. Straight up. John makes everything he works on better. So many people on this film were incredible collaborators, but every day on set, he's my number one on the call sheet. So having someone set the tone of being there for each actor, of service to the character, to the role, to the truth of what happened. I would say we're all working toward the same picture, the same vein of truth, but he makes it more honest, more truthful, he makes the funny lines funnier. He's good at his job, and I'm really, really grateful.
So you're making a film, like we said, this is a film that's sort of inspired by, or his actions are somewhat inspired by other films, and there is a sort of a narrative to a hostage situation, or what, that he is, that Brian is sort of trying to play along with, almost to get media attention, right? To draw some attention to his story. So did you have influences there? Like, are there sort of films you're looking at that you're like, well, I don't want to imitate this too much, or I do, how did you approach the genre of the hostage crisis film that exists for, over the last many decades?
Well, I'm obsessive, so I watch everything, and then you move forward and you say, this is an original story, and what is this story telling you to do? What is the palette this story? So then you work with your cinematographer, your editor, your sound designer, your production designer to craft the color palette that best embodies the truths of the story. Our story is about dignity. It's about one man's sincere-hearted rebellion against a broken system. So how do we show that broken system? How do we contrast against the broken system to show dignity? So we had a really, really intentional color palette. We had really intentional transitions and camera movement and framing, and you just take it one decision at a time to really craft that. And of course, you dig into the catalog of cinema history that is at your back, the wind at your back to do so.
Kwame, were there any films you were thinking of in particular as well? Obviously, more in the crafting of the screenplay, I know.
No one can avoid Dog Day Afternoon. For me, that's right. That's the classic bank robbery movie. And in a way, that was a role model because the dialogue is so tight and it could feel almost theatrical, and the way that the emotions are captured by the camera. You're in there with them and sweating with them. So Dog Day Afternoon was a kind of a role model in a way. But also Abi was very much, when we started speaking about that, was like, yeah, but then we've got to forget all of our comps. We've got to forget all of our references, and we've got to ignore that it's an existing genre, and we just have to go for it. And I think that's what lent us and sent us down the direction of going, well, look, part one is going to be a little Dog Day Afternoon, and part two is going to be a little, Michael Mann. It's going to be out there, and in a kind of way, we try to find our own pathway through a genre that is beloved and well trod, but the sincerity of this story meant that we had to try and ignore all of those things and just beat our own path to a degree.
And as you say, in the sort of second part, eventually we are zooming out. We're seeing the media side of it. We're seeing the police side of it, and there's a fatalism there too that is, you're very cold-eyed about. Like that there's not a lot of feeling from a lot of the authorities who are surrounding the situation of like, well, let's try and figure out what this guy wants, what's going on here. Like there's more of a sense of dread of like, well, how can we take care of this? And obviously you have Michael K. Williams's character is a little outside of that, but like, was that sort of crucial in crafting the story as well, to sort of like show that side of this sort of situation?
Abi?
Kwame, I was expecting you to take that one.
I would say that one of the beautiful things about working with Abi is that she always reminds me to look at the humanity of everyone that's in your screenplay. And if you can't find at least, love, but at least like or understanding for any character or any significant character that's in your screenplay, then they shouldn't be there. And so the idea of just going cops equal bad, they were all coming in just to take him out, was that we kind of got rid of that at day one. What we tried to do was to look at the truth of the situation. And for them, it was, here was a guy in there with a bomb. And I feel sympathetic, some might say, to the reasons why. But at the end of the day, we got to get those hostages out. And so we tried to not judge them, but also give the compassion to Michael's character, who could articulate that not just on his own behalf, but those who are part of the forces who actually care as well. Was that all right?
What
Abi?
was it like to?
Did I answer that one?
No, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Abi. Sorry, I forgot. You haven't answered it.
No, Kwame said all that needed to be said. Mm-hmm. Let the poet speak.
What was it like to work with Michael K. Williams too? I mean, obviously we recently lost him, and it's beautiful to see him on screen, and it's a beautiful performance.
I told him when I met him, it was a dream fulfilled to work with him, and it truly was. Every day he brings such spirit and joy to the crew. We all loved working with him. After he passed, I saw so many selfies he took with background extras and so many people who told me stories of career advice that Mike just took time to give them. And that was him. Like, he was always there for his fellow actors, and he was always there for me as a creative. We had this one scene that I think it must have been 106 degrees out, and we were shooting in a metal box, that trailer where he tells Brian, "You're on CNN," and something just was not resonating about that monologue, and we both knew it. We both knew that, like, there was something more to be had there, and we were on take. I don't want to say how high, but we were on pretty high takes. And Mike and I told him, like, okay, I think we got the pieces. And he's like, no, we got to go one more. And I told him, I'm like, oh, Mike, I think it's good. It's working. He's like, never tell me when it's good. Always tell me when it's not. And it's not right now. And I so love that. And there's so many sweet stories of moments that we had, but that's kind of his driver. and a brief snapshot of time with him, but what a dear soul.
So everything we're talking in terms of what's so magical about the film is what you're saying about its compassion for every character, for characters that are diametrically opposed, right? Like, Brian is holding these people hostage, but there's connections he makes there. There's connections he makes, obviously, talking to Connie Britton's character, talking to Michael's character. So how do you balance sort of, or like, how do you find that sympathy for everybody while maintaining the tension, like while maintaining the balance of something dangerous happening, something, unpredictable happening? Because obviously he's telling everyone, like, I'm not going to hurt you, don't worry. But obviously you still need, and you still feel that sense of danger.
No one's
One
the
of the
villain in
things
their...
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I want to hear what you have to say, Kwame, please.
But I want to hear what you want to say, so after you.
Okay. I was going to say that you hear that phrase so often from writers and directors and creatives, like, no one's the villain in their own story. So if we're operating out of a place of understanding and trying to see why people do what they do, the drivers behind them, then you can craft it honestly and truly by trying to understand. Intention, it's just a matter of acknowledging the circumstances.
I was very taken when I read the article at how softly spoken Brian was, and that those who were held hostage by him spoke of him so well post their trauma. And so I think if those who observed him in that situation could find empathy and sympathy for him, that kind of set the tone for Abi and I right across the board. That we had to attempt to walk with the same grace that Brian walked, even though he was amid a violent act. And I think Brian demanded that of us in terms of storytelling and looking after the characters.
And I mean, his distress in the film is so profound, and it's sometimes frightening, obviously, and sometimes he's sort of talking to people in the bank about things they don't really understand, things with his family, things with the VA. But you've managed essentially, right, to not have to represent that that his distress could be frightening, but also that it can be compassionate in the same moment. And I feel like these sorts of films usually have to villainize someone, and you've managed to chart a different path.
Thank you.
That's lovely
so
to
what
hear.
Are you hoping? Absolutely, it's a beautifully done film. What are you hoping people are walking out of the film thinking? Is there sort of concrete or significant action that can be taken in terms of what happened to Brian, what's happening in the VA, or is this sort of too staggering a thing to tackle? That was sort of my sort of frustration as the credits rolled. I was sort of just trying to think, how could this ever be avoided to never happen again?
I would say, and Abi will answer it fast. Sorry, Abi. I would say I've learnt another lesson from Abi on this. As I came into this project, like you, outraged that a man felt, or anyone would feel, that their life was worth less than $892. And of course, then that felt like that there was a big political point to be made. But actually, by the time I got to the end of watching the film that Abi had made, which is an augmentation of the blueprint, which is the script, I got to the place that I think the piece is simply trying to catalyze the debate so that we can take whatever action we feel we need to take to look after our fellow human beings, those who look after our streets, excuse me, those who look after our country, those that look after our children. That it actually, the hope is that people leave the film and go, what can I do? And that we're not trying to dictate what they should, but they will find out the best way that they can serve. Abi, I don't know if that's yours. That's certainly mine after seeing your film.
It articulates it beautifully, and it'll always be ours. I can't take ownership over that, because knowing there's so much to be had individually from Brian's story. I learned so much as a writer, as a director, working on this. But that is my deep hope, what Kwame said, that it will cross political lines and it will enable people to just look inward for a moment and then immediately look outward at their neighbor as they walk out the door, instead of looking to others to solve those problems. Solve yourself and do right by people, as Brian says.
Well, we're going to leave it there. Abi and Kwame, thank you so much for joining us today. Wonderful to have you. To read more of our stories and to subscribe to The Atlantic, please visit theatlantic.com/culture. And you can check out more of our coverage at Sundance right here on The Atlantic's YouTube page and on the Sundance Film Festival's virtual main street. Thanks again, guys. Thank you for talking.